August 4th, 1914, Berlin. Social Democratic deputies walk into the Reichstag to vote for war credits, while their comrades, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, prepare to break party unity forever. The German Empire expects total loyalty. The party leadership demands discipline. But what happens to those who say no to their own government in the middle of a world war? How do you survive when your country calls you a traitor for refusing to kill? What price do you pay for standing against the machine? The Social Democratic Party held 110 seats in the Reichstag and commanded the loyalty of over 4 million German workers. For decades, they had preached international solidarity and opposed militarism. But when Kaiser Wilhelm declared war on Russia and France, party leaders abandoned their principles and voted to fund the war machine. A small group refused to follow. They would pay with their freedom, their safety, and often their lives. Karl Liebknecht cast the first no vote on December 2nd, 1914. The son of Wilhelm Liebknecht, a founder of German socialism, Karl stood alone in the Reichstag chamber as every other deputy supported new war credits. Police files show surveillance began that same day. Rosa Luxemburg, already under watch for her radical writings, published anti-war pamphlets through underground networks. By January 1915, both faced treason charges. The trials began in February 1915 at the district court in Berlin. Liebknecht defended his vote with a statement that lasted 40 minutes. Court records show he called the war a product of capitalist greed and imperial rivalry. The judges sentenced him to 2.5 years in prison for high treason. Rosa Luxemburg received her first prison term in February 1915 for publishing an illegal pamphlet titled "The Crisis in German Social Democracy." She would serve 14 months in the women's prison at Posen. Otto Rühle joined the opposition in March 1916, voting against war credits alongside Liebknecht. Police reports from the period show constant surveillance of socialist meetings in Dresden, where Rühle organized workers against the war. Hugo Haase, former party chairman, broke with the leadership in December 1915 and founded the Independent Social Democratic Party in April 1917. By then, 18 deputies had left the main party to oppose the war. The underground grew through 1916. The Spartacus League, led by Luxemburg and Liebknecht from their prison cells, distributed leaflets across Berlin, Hamburg, and the Ruhr Valley. Police raids on April 1st, 1917 uncovered printing operations in 7 cities. Franz Mehring, age 71, and a veteran socialist writer, spent 6 months in Luckau prison for editing anti-war publications. Clara Zetkin faced house arrest in Stuttgart after organizing women's peace demonstrations. Prison records from 1916 show Rosa Luxemburg held in protective custody at the fortress of Ronke in Prussia. She wrote letters to friends describing conditions in her cell, which measured 8 feet by 12 feet. Guards allowed her 1 book per week and 30 minutes of exercise daily. Her health deteriorated through the winter months. Court documents show she faced new charges every few months for pamphlets written before her arrest and smuggled out of prison. The revolution began in Kiel on November 3rd, 1918. Sailors refused orders to launch a final offensive against the British fleet. Workers and soldiers, councils formed in Hamburg, Bremen, and Munich within days. Karl Liebknecht walked out of prison on October 23rd as part of a general amnesty. Rosa Luxemburg gained release on November 9th, the same day Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated. The Spartacists called for immediate revolution. On December 30th, 1918, they founded the German Communist Party at a congress in Berlin. Police intelligence reports from January 1919 show government fears of a Bolshevik-style takeover. Gustav Noske, the Social Democratic Defense Minister, authorized the use of Freikorps units against the revolutionaries. These paramilitary groups, led by former Imperial Army officers, promised to restore order through violence. If you value documented World War II and post-war history like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Now back to the story. The uprising began on January 5th, 1919. Communist workers occupied newspaper buildings and government offices across Berlin. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht went into hiding in a safe house in the Wilmersdorf district. Freikorps troops under Captain Waldemar Pabst surrounded the city center with machine guns and artillery. Street fighting lasted 6 days. Government forces killed over 100 revolutionaries. January 15th, 1919, Hotel Eden, Berlin. Freikorps soldiers drag Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht from their hiding place to face interrogation. Captain Pabst orders immediate execution without trial. A rifle butt crushes Luxemburg's skull at 9:30 in the evening. Soldiers shoot Liebknecht in the back near the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial at 10:15. His body reaches the morgue at 11:45. Rosa Luxemburg's corpse disappears into the Landwehr Canal. The trials of lesser figures stretched through 1920. Hugo Hasse returned to the Reichstag as leader of the independent Socialists, but faced constant death threats. An assassin shot him outside the Reichstag building on October 7, 1919. He died from his wounds on November 7th. Otto Rühle abandoned politics entirely and worked as a school psychologist in Dresden until his death in 1943. Franz Mehring never recovered from his prison term. He died of pneumonia on January 28, 1919, just weeks after his release. Clara Zetkin fled to the Soviet Union in 1924 after facing repeated arrest warrants. She died in Moscow on June 20, 1933, one day before her scheduled return to Germany to face Nazi persecution. The Freikorps officers faced military tribunals in March 1920. Lieutenant Kurt Vogel, who shot Karl Liebknecht, received a sentence of 2 years and 4 months for manslaughter. Otto Runge, who killed Rosa Luxemburg, got 2 years for attempted manslaughter. Captain Pabst faced no charges. Court records show the judges accepted his claim that both deaths resulted from legitimate military action during an armed uprising. Many survivors fled Germany as the Nazis rose to power. Wilhelm Pieck, a Spartacist organizer, spent the war years in Moscow and returned as East Germany's first president in 1949. Paul Levi, Rosa Luxemburg's lawyer and lover, practiced law in Berlin until 1933, then committed suicide in France rather than face arrest. Ernst Mayr died in Berlin in 1930. Still working for the underground Communist Party. The exile community remained divided by old conflicts. In Moscow, German communists split between those who supported Stalin's purges and those who opposed them. Wilhelm Pieck endorsed every Soviet policy change, earning Stalin's trust and a comfortable position in the Comintern hierarchy. Ruth Fischer, a former party leader, criticized Stalin's methods and found herself expelled from the party in 1926. She spent the war years in poverty in New York, writing articles for anti-communist publications. The independent Social Democrats reunited with the main party in 1922, abandoning their anti-war stance entirely. Kurt Eisner, who led the Bavarian Revolution in November 1918, ruled as minister-president for 100 days before his assassination on February 21, 1919. His killer, Count Anton Arco of Valley served 5 years in prison and lived quietly in Munich until 1945. Economic catastrophe followed political defeat. Germany owed 132 billion gold marks in war reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. Hyperinflation destroyed middle-class savings and working-class wages alike. A loaf of bread cost 4 billion marks in November 1923. The economic chaos vindicated socialist predictions about the war's costs. But nobody cared about being right when their money became worthless overnight. The Nazi rise eliminated the last traces of socialist opposition. Stormtroopers raided trade union headquarters on May 2nd, 1933, arresting thousands of organizers and seizing union treasuries worth over 20 million marks. Otto Wels, the Social Democratic leader, delivered the last anti-Nazi speech in the Reichstag on March 23rd before fleeing to Paris. He died in exile in 1939. Still calling for resistance to fascism, government records released in 1968 show the Freikorps received direct orders from Social Democratic leaders to eliminate the Spartacists. Gustav Noske, the defense minister who authorized the killings, wrote in his memoirs that someone had to be the bloodhound. He kept his seat in the Reichstag until 1933 and survived the Nazi period under house arrest in Hanover. The financial cost of suppressing socialism dwarfed the expense of fighting the war itself. Government records show payments of 47 million marks to Freikorps units between January and December 1919. Each unit received bonuses for captured weapons, arrested communists, and cleared districts. Captain Pabst's Guard Cavalry Rifle Division earned over 2 million marks in reward payments during their 3-month deployment in Berlin. International observers documented the systematic brutality. British journalist Evelyn Sharp witnessed Freikorps executions in Munich during May 1919. Her dispatches to the Manchester Guardian described summary shootings of prisoners who had already surrendered. French military attaché Colonel Henri Mordac reported similar scenes from Berlin, writing that German government forces showed greater savagery toward their own citizens than they had toward foreign enemies during the war. The Communist International expelled the German party leadership 3 times between 1919 and 1925 for ideological deviations. Moscow demanded absolute loyalty to Soviet policies, creating constant internal conflicts. Heinrich Brandler, party chairman from 1921 to 1923, Zheng Bainer was removed for opposing Stalin's orders to launch a revolution during the French occupation of the Ruhr. His replacement, Ernst Thälmann, lasted until his arrest by the Nazis in 1933. Regional differences shaped the persecution of anti-war socialists. Bavaria remained more conservative and Catholic, making life harder for Marxist organizers. Police records from Munich show arrest rates 4 times higher than in Protestant Prussia for identical political activities. Saxon authorities proved more tolerant, allowing underground meetings to continue with minimal interference. Workers in the Ruhr Valley protected socialist organizers from police raids, creating safe corridors between industrial cities. Women played crucial roles in maintaining the underground networks. Matilda Jacob, Rosa Luxemburg's secretary, spent 18 months in prison for smuggling letters and documents, released in November 1919. She rebuilt communications between scattered communist cells across Germany. Police surveillance reports show she coordinated the activities of over 300 female couriers who carried messages, money, and weapons between cities. The bodies told the final story. Karl Liebknecht rests in the Friedrichsfelde Cemetery in Berlin, where thousands gather each January 15th to honor his memory. Rosa Luxemburg's remains stayed lost in the Landwehr Canal until May 31st, 1919, when canal workers found her decomposed corpse. The autopsy revealed a crushed skull and 2 bullet wounds. She lies beside Liebknecht in the same cemetery. Memorialization became another battleground. The Weimar government banned public demonstrations at the graves until 1925. Police arrested over 100 mourners during the first legal memorial service on January 15th, 1926. The Nazi regime destroyed the original monuments in 1935 and converted the cemetery section into a municipal garden. East German authorities rebuilt the memorial in 1951, creating the shrine that stands today. Medical records reveal the physical toll of resistance. Dr. Paul Hirsch, who treated imprisoned socialists, documented systematic malnutrition, untreated infections, and psychological breakdown among political prisoners. His confidential report to the Prussian Health Ministry in December 1919 described conditions worse than military field hospitals during the war. Authorities ignored his recommendations for improved medical care and better food rations. The intelligence networks that tracked anti-war socialists continued operating through the Weimar Republic and into the Nazi period. Police files from the period showed detailed surveillance of former Spartacists and their families for over 20 years after the uprising. Children of executed revolutionaries faced discrimination in schools and employment. Matilda Liebknecht, Karl's widow, could not find work in Berlin and survived on charity from underground supporters until her death in 1943. Captain Waldemar Pabst emigrated to Austria in 1935 and worked as a military advisor to fascist movements across Europe. In 1962, he gave a magazine interview admitting he ordered both killings without trial. He claimed Gustav Noske knew of the plan in advance. Pabst died peacefully in Dusseldorf on May 29, 1970, having never faced prosecution for murder. Legal proceedings dragged on for decades without resolution. The families of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht filed wrongful death lawsuits in 1921, seeking damages from the German state. Courts dismissed the cases in 1924, ruling that the deaths occurred during legitimate military operations. Appeals continued until 1931, when the legal system collapsed under Nazi pressure. No compensation was ever paid to the victims. Survivors. The German government opened sealed military files in 1992 that confirmed Noske's direct involvement in planning the executions. The documents show he met with Pabst on January 14th to discuss eliminating the Spartacist leadership. Both men agreed that trials would create martyrs and prolong the revolution. The orders went out the same evening. 档案还透露了更深层的阴谋。秘密会议记录显示，社会民主党领导曾在1918年12月就开始策划清除共产党人。弗里德里希·埃伯特在12月28日的闭门会议上说 ：“We cannot allow Bolshevism to take root in German soil。”菲利普·谢德曼补充道 ：“The revolution must end with us, not beyond us.” The transcript records unanimous agreement to use any means necessary to prevent a communist takeover. Secret documents revealed a deeper conspiracy. Meeting records show Social Democratic leaders began planning the elimination of communists in December 1918. Friedrich Ebert told a closed session on December 28th, "We cannot allow Bolshevism to take root in German soil." Philipp Scheidemann added, "The revolution must end with us, not beyond us." The transcript records unanimous agreement to use any means necessary to prevent a communist takeover. Corporate leaders supported the crackdown with money and logistics. Hugo Stinnes, Germany's steel magnate, provided transportation and safe houses for Freikorps units. His company records show payments of 800,000 marks to paramilitary groups between January and June 1919. Gustav Krupp contributed weapons and ammunition from his factories, stockpiles. Industrial leaders feared worker control of their enterprises more than they feared political instability. The Catholic Church played a complicated role in the persecution. Archbishop Michael von Faulhaber of Munich publicly condemned communist violence while privately sheltering socialist refugees in church buildings. His diaries, released in 1995, describe hiding 12 families during the Bavarian Soviet Republic's collapse. Other bishops openly supported the Freikorps, blessing their weapons and conducting funeral services for fallen paramilitaries. Prison conditions deteriorated as political arrests increased. Moabit prison in Berlin held over 2,000 political prisoners by March 1919. Triple its designed capacity, cells built for one person housed 4 or 5 inmates. Food rations dropped to 800 calories per day. Disease spread rapidly through overcrowded blocks. Prison records show 67 deaths from typhus and dysentery during the first quarter of 1919. The educational system became another front in the anti-socialist campaign. Prussian Education Minister Karl dismissed over 400 teachers suspected of radical sympathies between February and September 1919. Universities expelled students who participated in socialist demonstrations. The curriculum was revised to emphasize patriotism and discourage critical thinking about economic systems. Textbooks that mentioned class struggle were banned from school libraries. International labor movements struggled to support their German comrades. British trade unions collected over £50,000 for political prisoners' families, but could not transfer the money through normal banking channels. French socialists organized protest rallies in Paris and Lyon, demanding the release of imprisoned German leaders. American labor leaders sent food packages through neutral countries, but German customs officials confiscated most shipments. The psychological warfare against socialists extended beyond direct persecution. Government propaganda portrayed all opposition as foreign-inspired treason. Newspapers published forged documents claiming Russian gold funded the Spartacist uprising. Radio broadcasts repeated stories about communist atrocities that never occurred. The campaign aimed to isolate socialists from potential middle-class supporters who might otherwise sympathize with their economic demands. Children of executed socialists faced systematic discrimination that lasted generations. Schools expelled the sons and daughters of known communists. Employers blacklisted entire families, making it impossible to find steady work. Housing officials denied rental applications from relatives of political prisoners. The persecution created a hidden caste of internal exiles who survived on the margins of German society for decades. Medical professionals who treated political prisoners risked their own careers. Dr. Ernst Schwenninger lost his position at Berlin University Hospital after documenting torture injuries among Spartacist prisoners. His detailed medical reports, preserved in hospital archives, describe systematic beatings, deliberate malnutrition, and denial of basic medical care. Hospital administrators warned other doctors against treating political prisoners without police supervision. The international press coverage varied dramatically by country and political orientation. British conservative newspapers praised the Freikorps as defenders of order and democracy. Liberal publications in France and Britain expressed concern about summary executions and denied legal rights. American socialist papers called the events a massacre and demanded international intervention. Coverage in neutral countries like Switzerland focused on the refugee crisis as thousands fled across the border. Intelligence operations continued long after the immediate crisis ended. Police maintained files on over 50,000 suspected communist sympathizers through the 1920s. Informants infiltrated trade unions, political clubs, and social organizations. The surveillance network employed over 3,000 agents and spent 2 million marks annually on intelligence gathering. Former political prisoners remained under constant observation for the rest of their lives. Foreign intelligence services monitored the German socialist crisis closely. British MI6 files released in 1997 show agents reported weekly on Spartacist activities from October 1918 through March 1919. French military intelligence provided weapons and funding to Freikorps units, seeing them as a barrier against Bolshevik expansion westward. American diplomats warned Washington that a communist Germany would threaten Allied victory and demanded intervention to support the moderate government. The post-war economic settlement destroyed working-class living standards and vindicated socialist warnings about capitalist war. Unemployment reached 6 million by 1932. Industrial production fell to 60% of 1913 levels. The human cost of opposing the war paled beside the devastation that following it brought to ordinary Germans who had trusted their leaders promises of victory and prosperity. Opposition to that First World War cost German socialists everything they had built over 50 years of organizing. But their sacrifice bought nothing except their own destruction at the hands of former comrades who chose power over principle. leaving only graves that governments still fear to acknowledge.